Okay. Now first, before tax. Okay, so before tax, the economy would be at, or the market would be at this equilibrium here. And then consumer surplus would be the top triangle, so A to C to P star. And producer surplus would be the bottom triangle here between P star, C, and E. And so then the total surplus would be A, C, E. Okay. Okay, so now with a tax, and I'll color this part in. Okay, so with a tax, the equilibrium will now be at B, and the price the consumers pay will be PC. So the consumer surplus will be here. And then the price that the producers get is the producer price PP. The difference goes to the government. So this would be producer surplus there. Oops. And then the government gets the area in between. So tax revenue, and then of course the deadweight loss over here. But okay, so consumer surplus, A, B, PC. Producer surplus, they get paid the price PP, so that price over to D and E. Tax revenues, the rectangle. And now the total surplus is going to be these three areas. Remember, with a tax, the total surplus also includes the tax revenue. So even though it is money that's taken away from the consumer and taken away from the producer, it still belongs to the society because the government has that money. So that would be included in total surplus. So total surplus would be, I'll just put the sum first, CS plus tax revenue plus PS. And so with the letters, that would be A, B, D, E. Okay, and then deadweight loss. Good. All right, any questions? Okay, that was chapter 4. Okay, so now the things that you guys learned about on Wednesday. Quotas first here. So quotas were a limit on the quantity, and the quantity would be limited to less than the equilibrium quantity. And when that quantity is limited, the price the consumers are willing to pay goes up. So there's the movement up the demand curve, and now the consumers will pay this price, PC, rather than at the equilibrium price, P star. So the consumer surplus then, this is the price the consumers are paying, so there's the demand curve. So here's what they're willing to pay, this is what they actually pay, so this will be the consumer surplus. For producers, they get paid PC. The consumers pay them this much. Now with the tax, what happened next was that the producer had to give some of that to the government. But with a quota, they don't have to give the government any money. So the producers will simply get paid the high price, they get to keep the high price. So the producer surplus then is the difference between the price they get paid and their marginal cost of production, which is down here. So this whole area here, this trapezoid shape, will be the producer surplus. Now, this rectangular portion here, which with a tax would have been the tax revenue, with a quota, this rectangular portion is called the quota rent, which is down here, the quota rent. And what it means is just the extra profit that they're making, because they would have supplied this quantity for only this price, but instead they're getting paid this price. So that rectangular area is the extra profit that they're making because they have the quota license. Okay, and then we have deadweight loss, of course, over here. Good. Okay, so consumer surplus. Producer surplus is the full trapezoid, so from P, C, B, D, E. The quota rent is just the rectangular portion, and it is included in the producer surplus then. Okay, and so then total surplus is the combination of consumer and producer surplus. Not quite. The quota rent is just the rectangular part, and then the producer surplus also includes this triangular part. Okay, so the rectangle's quota rent, the producer surplus is the full trapezoid shape then. Okay, so this is included in here. Okay. Do I've got the letters wrong?
Yeah, they're the exact same letters. So
Oh. B, oh, that's right. Okay, sorry. That's better. Okay. Yes. Sometimes when I'm trying to talk and write at the same time, it just doesn't come out right. Okay, any other questions? Good. All right. Okay, so now price controls. So price controls were when the government felt that the equilibrium price was too high or too low. So minimum wage was an example of a price floor where they push the price up. And then rent control is when they push the price down, so that's called a price ceiling. And so it's the opposite of a building. The floor, price floor will go above the equilibrium, ceilings will go below, and that's because there's simply a minimum and a maximum. So the price floor is a minimum, so it pushes the price up and it prevents the price from going below it, so it acts like a floor. Whereas the ceiling pushes the price down and it prevents the price from going up, so it acts like a ceiling. Okay, now, all right, so the table here first is talking about minimum wage, so we'll look at this graph first. Before, so that means at the equilibrium, so before there is a minimum wage. At the equilibrium, consumer surplus would have been ABC, producer surplus would have been DEF. And no deadweight loss. Okay, so the consumers in In a labor market, remember the consumers, the demand curve would be the employers. So the price that they have to pay for the workers is now at $8. So this is the price they pay. This is the demand curve. So the consumer surplus would now be A. So compared to before, so the change is that they're losing the areas B and C. So we'll put minus B minus C. So they lose those two areas. Now, where do those areas go? Some of it goes to the workers, because the workers, rather than getting paid W star, the workers are going to get paid $8. And so the producer surplus, which would be the workers, they're selling their labor, they get paid $8, their marginal cost is down here. So this trapezoid shape here would be their producer surplus. So B, E, and F. Now what happened there? So, okay, so this one is a little bit more detailed. Now at the equilibrium, there were 20 workers who had, and 20 jobs, right? It was an equilibrium, so there were 20 jobs, 20 workers. But then the wage went up, and when the wage went up, now the employers only want to have 15 workers. So these 5 workers no longer have a job. And so they would lose surplus. The surplus that they would lose would be the area D. Right? So they used to have the surplus area D, so, and in the table that's right there. But now they don't have a job, so they're going to lose their surplus. So they will be the people who are worse off. But these 15 people who still have a job are better off, because rather than getting paid W star, they're going to get paid the $8 an hour. So they will get the area B. Their surplus will increase by the area B, which we can see here. So they lose the area D, but now they have the area B. Okay, so we'll put minus D plus B. Okay, now total surplus is just everything but C and D, because C and D are now going to be the deadweight loss. So A, B, E, F, and then C and D will be the deadweight loss. So, oh, and then we can fill in the change here. So for the total surplus, now they lose the deadweight loss, so minus C minus D. Okay, so a minimum wage is helpful as long as you still can find the work. But if you can't find work because of the minimum wage, then obviously it's not very helpful. All right, so now the rent control. Now, starting with the before the rent control, so that's at the equilibrium, so that will be just like this table here. The consumer surplus would be ABC and D, E, F. And total all right, so now the after. Okay, so now it's going to be the consumers who are, well, okay, better off and worse off at the same time. All right, now here is the demand, or the willingness to pay, and now the price is down here at $600. All right, so consumer surplus will be this trapezoid shape, A, B, and E. Oops, sorry. So what has happened compared to before is that they have lost area C, but they have gained area E. Now what's going on is that at the equilibrium, there were 1,000 units for rent and 1,000 families who were renting the units. But now at the lower price, there's only 800 units for rent and only 800 families are able to find a place to rent then. So these 200 families here no longer are able to find a place to rent. So they are the ones who will lose the Area C. But the 800 families who have a place to rent are better off because rather than paying P star, they're paying only $600. So the cost has gone down for them. And so their surplus has increased by the Area E. Okay, so compared to before, they have lost the Area C, so minus C. So that's the people who can't find a place because of the shortage, but they have gained Area E, and that's the people who do find a place and are able to pay a lower rent than before. Now the producer surplus, so this would go to the landlords. This is clearly going to be lower. They used to get D, E, and F when they got paid this rent and they were renting 1,000 units, but now they're only getting paid this price, $600. Here's their costs, and so they only get F. And so they're clearly worse off. They will lose the Area D and E. Okay, so total surplus, consumer and producer surplus, so A, B, E, F, and deadweight losses, C and D again. So total surplus decreases by the deadweight loss. Good, all right. Any questions? All right. Okay, so next page is going to be a summary. We're going to put all those 4 government interferences into the same page so that we can sort of visualize the difference between all of these different policies. All right. Okay. Oh, keep kicking that thing. I've got more colors. Okay, and then I've got colors up here. Obviously, you don't have to follow that if you don't have the right colors with you, but I'll try to follow these colors. Color scheme. Okay, price ceiling. Now, price ceiling goes below the equilibrium. So we just draw a horizontal line below the equilibrium. And the quantity that is supplied is now here. So at this price, going over to the supply curve, this will be the quantity supplied. Now, I'll draw that dotted line up here. Okay, so with a price ceiling, oh, I need red. Good. The consumers have this willingness to pay. This is the price they actually pay. So this here will be the consumer surplus. And then producer surplus. So producers get paid this price, and this is their marginal cost, so this will be their producer surplus. That's blue, it's quite dark though. Good, and then deadweight loss. Okay, price floor is the opposite. It will go above the equilibrium. And at that high price, the sellers would like to sell more, but they can't because the consumers will only be willing to buy this quantity here. So that will be the quantity demanded at that high price. And the consumers will only get this little consumer surplus up here. Here's their willingness to pay. Here's the price they're now paying. So this will be consumer surplus. The sellers, though, they will get paid now this high price up here. Here's their marginal cost of production, so this will be the producer surplus. And deadweight loss. Okay, so now a tax. Now the tax gets added to the supply price. So we want to draw another supply curve here. And remember, this is not quite the same as a shift because the costs of production don't actually change. It's just that the tax has to be added to the supply price, but the seller doesn't actually get to keep it. But it pushes the price up for the consumer. So now the consumer has to pay this price here. So we'll call that PC. And going down, this will be the quantity that is sold. And the price that the seller gets will be this consumer price minus the tax, which will be here. So it'll be on the original supply curve, so that will be the amount of money that the seller actually gets to keep. All right, so consumers, here's their willingness to pay, here's the price they actually pay. Producers, here's the price they get paid. Here's their marginal cost of production. So this will be the producer surplus. And then the money in between, of course, goes to the government. So tax revenue and then deadweight loss. I was going to talk to you guys later today, before the end of class, about carbon taxes a little bit. Not that it's, I'm not going to test you on it for this course, but just out of interest, because in the election there's a lot of debate about carbon taxes. So this kind of a tax is not a carbon tax. This is like a sales tax, and so it causes deadweight loss in an economy. But a carbon tax is actually a good kind of tax because it decreases pollution, right? So it actually makes us better off, right? So a regular sales tax does not make us better off, but a pollution tax would. Anyway, I'll talk more about that later. All right, last one, quota. All right, so now the quantity is restricted. And at that quantity, I'll just put Q. At that quantity, the consumers are now willing to pay this higher price. So, consumer surplus, here's their willingness to pay, here's the price they're paying, so that's their consumer surplus. The sellers with the quota, They get to keep that high price. Here's their marginal cost of production, so that whole area will be their producer surplus. And then deadweight loss. Good. All right. Okay, so hopefully that'll help you just to have it all on one page so you can sort of visualize the different things that are happening. All of them have deadweight loss. And most of them make the consumers worse off. All right, last thing is an exercise. All right. Okay, so we've got a demand function and a supply function. First thing to do is calculate the equilibrium. No, three. Okay, Q star is 100. Okay, so then P star will be 50. Okay. If there is a $20 price ceiling, what is the quantity traded? All right, so price ceiling, all right, just looking here. That's this one here. Okay, so our equilibrium price is 50, but there's going to be a price ceiling at 20. And so what we need to calculate first is the quantity here, and that is a quantity supplied, right? It's the quantity given by the supply curve. Okay, so we'll figure out what that quantity is. Okay, so now we can start drawing the graph. All right, so then we're going to calculate these different areas. And, okay, so it's a price ceiling. So just putting this up here again. So this is the picture here. So it's a price ceiling. So consumer surplus will, I'm going to use a color. Okay, so consumer surplus will be, here's their willingness to pay, they're paying $20. So consumer surplus will be this area. And then the producer surplus will be down here. And then deadweight loss. Okay, so we just need to know this number here, right? This number here, which we would call the demand price at 40. So at 40, we need to know what is that right there. Okay, so just using the demand function, we put in the quantity of 40. Okay, all right, so consumer surplus. So I'll use the formula for a trapezoid. So height 1, 300 minus 20, so 280, plus height 2, 200 minus 20, so 180, times the width times half. Producer surplus, the little triangle shape, so height 20 times width times half. Okay, total surplus, just add them together. And then deadweight loss. So deadweight loss is a triangle. The height of the triangle, 200 minus 20, so 180. And then the width will be 60, right? 100 minus 40. Okay, now last one here. Now in your notes it says, suppose instead there's a quota at 80. But then we're going to have to do a bunch of other calculations. So let's just change it to 40, and then we can just use all the numbers that we've got in the graph. Okay, so if there is a quota at 40, then the deadweight loss will be the same. What's going to change is that now the consumers will only get this triangle here because they are now going to have to pay the price of 200. So consumers will just get this triangle here, and the producers, now their surplus will go up to 200 because instead of getting paid 20, they're going to get paid 200. So their surplus will go up to there. All right, so consumer surplus, triangle, so height, 300 minus 200, so 100, times the width, 40. And then producer surplus, now use a trapezoid formula for that one. Let's see, height 1 is 200, right? Because it goes from 200 down to 0. So 200 plus, now this height is 180 here, right? 200 minus 20, so 180 times 40 times a half. Total surplus, now we just add those together, 2,000 plus 7,600, so 9,600. And deadweight loss is the same area, so that we've already done that calculation, 5,400.